Hello and a warm welcome to all Leatherhead members on this webinar entitled Cultured Meat, Navigating the Regulation in the European Union, USA and China. I'm Annie-Laure Robin. I'm a senior regulatory consultant in Leatherhead Food Research, where I advise on European food law and any French-speaking country food law. I've been here in Leatherhead for the past 12 years, but before joining Leatherhead, I spent 6 years working in UK government, where I built up my knowledge on European food law and implementation of these in UK food law. And I also was part of the novel food team, where I helped company applying for the approval of their new ingredient, a new product, through the European novel food process. And that's why now today I lead in Leatherhead Food Research, the dossier service. Today I'm going to talk to you about cultured meat. So cultured meat is also called, as you may know, cultivated meat, lab-grown meat, or even the dossier service. Today I'm going to talk to you about cultured meat. So cultured meat is also called, as you may know, cultivated meat, lab-grown meat, or even cells-based meat. And these are now emerging in market around the world, with Singapore being the first country to approve this type of food through cultured chicken nugget, and that was done in December 2020. In today's webinar, I will explain the complexity of this new type of food and how they are perceived by consumer. I will also cover the regulatory processes that apply to this type of product in the European Union, the USA, and China. In the next half an hour, I will cover all the points highlighted on these slides. The first one being what is cultured meat and what is the consumer demand for it. Where are we currently in terms of developing this type of product? And what are the regulatory information we have in Europe, US, China on getting those cultured meat on this market? And then I will wrap up the presentation with a summary and takeaway point. So let's start talking about what is exactly cultured meat. What is it including, excluding, how is it made, and what is the consumer demand for this type of new product in the European Union, USA, or China? As I'm sure you all know, lab-grown meat is a brand new industry. And the first cell-cultured burger was presented on TV in August 2013 by the Dutch scientist Mike Poos, who works in Maastricht University. It wasn't a perfect product. It did not really taste or look like a normal burger. And to top it up, it costed $300,000 to make. So since then, cultured meat has been the subject of many press and scientific journal articles, and it's becoming really a hot topic nowadays as the industry is getting closer and closer of being able to place cultured meat on the market. So why is cultured meat being developed? Over the last few decades, the demand of fish and meat product has increased in connection with the increase of the world population, the increase of the population incomes, and urbanization across the globe. So cultured meat are being developed for consumers who are meat eaters and are seeking to reduce the environmental impact related to meat production. Because we know that global meat consumption is growing at 1.4% per year, and more developing countries are getting richer, which therefore translate to an increase in meat consumption on average in their population compared to what they used to eat in the past. And we expect that by 2050, the global meat consumption will reach up to 570 million tons. What does it mean? It means that the global meat consumption would have doubled since 2008. So to answer these demands for meat and fish, intensive and industrial agriculture and fishing practices have been put in place, as we know, but these have been proven to have a negative environmental impact, putting strain on natural resources such as land, fresh water, and energy. And also livestock production is responsible for 14.5% of greenhouse emission. However, as shown on this chart, on this slide, recent report from the Food and Agriculture Organization indicate that there has been a turn in the expected trend as global meat production has actually decreased for the first time in 2019. This is the second time since 1961 when production also fell. And it also declined in 2020 due to mainly to the coronavirus pandemic. What does it mean? It means that there has been a 3% drop in per capita meat consumption in 2020, which is the biggest decline since at least 2000. And we know that consumers are being more and more critical towards the lack of animal welfare in some abattoirs, for example, the use of antibiotics in animals, and they're very conscientious about the safety of meat because they have been through the BSE crisis, avian flu, or SRA. So in order to fulfill their role towards a more sustainable and safe way of producing meat and fish products, the industry has been looking at developing synthetic or artificial or lab-grown meat or fish. But I'm not sure this is the answer for the future for meat and fish consumption. It's definitely not an answer to consumer demand for vegan alternative, which is usually fulfilled by plant or fungi-derived meat analog, because cultured meat is not for vegan or vegetarian. It's made from animal cell, as I'm going to show you later on. But it could be an answer for people who are on a flexitarian diet as an alternative to meat product and fish product. Cultured meat raises several challenges in terms of its development, how it is regulated, and also the economic impact on communities that are dependent on animal farming. But one of the major questions, I think, for the industry is whether consumers will eat, try, or buy cultured meat. And this table shows you a summary of the key outcomes from different consumer surveys on cultured meat carried out in the UK, the Netherlands, the USA, India, and China. These were carried out between 2013 and 2019. From these surveys, it looks clear to me that the commercial success of cultured meat in the short term depends on consumer acceptance. And for the long term, you may be able to think that cultured meat will need to be able to bring societal benefit. But as you can see from this survey result, consumer answers to questions that would you eat it or not, or you don't know, are really inconsistent. And this is because it's dependent on a number of factors, including how you phrase the question to the sample of consumer you're surveying, in which country the survey has been carried out, and also the lack of familiarity of some of those consumers with the new cultured meat concept. These charts illustrate better the results of the surveys I've just shown you in the previous slide. Different samples and question wording affect survey responses, which means that if you ask a consumer, would you eat cultured meat, would you try it, or would you buy it, you may get different responses. But the main differences appear to be based on the amount of information given to participants, which is quite normal when you think about it. And the three most optimistic survey highlighted here really shows that participants are willing to try cultured meat, but this is because they were given very positive information on the product. Whereas the most negative findings are from surveys where participants were given very little information on the product. And therefore, it seems that depending on the amount of information consumers are giving, it will influence the attitudes and the acceptance of cultured meat. But overall, it seems that cultured meat is likely to be more accepted by consumers in the USA, China, or India, rather than to those based in Europe. However, Americans are less willing to eat cultured meat than consumers in China and India. This may be explained because agriculture of animal plays a different role in those societies in terms of economically being dependent on that. So in order to demonstrate the increased consumers' acceptance of cultured meat, few experimental studies have been carried out, and cultured meat becomes significantly less appealing when it is presented as a technological innovation rather than when the focus is on its environmental or safety and potential health benefits, or even its similarity to conventional meat. And in the same way, if you describe to a consumer cultured meat with overly technical descriptions, it seems that it's less appealing to them rather than using more straightforward description. So names such as lab-grown meat doesn't really appeal to consumer because it invokes science and not being so natural. Whereas if you use terms such as clean meat that highlight the benefit relative to conventional meat, consumers are more attracted to that, it seems. So I've just covered how cultured meat are perceived by consumers and the factors that may influence the demand for this type of product. Now I'm going to focus on where we are currently with the development of cultured meat and also what is the regulatory landscape in the European Union, USA, and China covering this type of product. So where are we with the production of cultured meat? At the moment, it has only been produced in laboratories. And this slide shows you at a very top level the process involved in making cultured meat. So the first step is to extract muscle cells from a living animal, which could be a cow, a chicken, a pork, or even a fish. And those cells are then cultivated in specific environment. They can multiply to create muscle tissue, which is the main component of the conventional meat we eat. And if you compare cultured meat with the conventional meat, it is biologically exactly the same as the meat tissue that comes from an animal. It is important to note that the cell's culture doesn't involve any genetic modification. But there are few challenges that are associated with the production of cultured meat, as highlighted at the bottom of this slide. So starting with the extraction method, we want to make sure that animals do not suffer. And then when you cultivate the cells, these are grown in cultured media, which is currently fetal calf serum, which doesn't appeal really ethically to consumer. But scientists are looking for more ethical alternative to be used for commercial purposes at the moment. And more research is also needed on developing the technologies used so they can be scaled up to a production that could provide cultured meat at industry level. These production processes involving cultured meat are also ideally they will need to be using clean energy source and be cost efficient. And finally, looking at the end product from the process, cultured meat, work still needs to be done on its organoleptic properties for consumer acceptance, and also how it will be described on its label, and there's some regulatory implication there that I'm going to discuss later. And also it needs to be sold at a competitive price compared to conventional meat. Now let's look at the regulatory landscape for meat and meat product in the European Union, USA, and China. Here I provided a summary of the different definitions for meat and meat products in those different countries or regions. And you can see that they do not really align. Currently, the European Union defines meat as the edible part of animal, including blood, from domestic and game animal. And they have also a definition of meat product that you can read yourself. Similarly, in the United States, there is a definition provided by the US Department of Agriculture that meat or any carcass or part thereof, meat or meat food product under one or more of the following circumstances, and there is a list of circumstances in the legislation in the US. And if you look at China, it's a totally different way of regulating or defining meat. They do not have actually a definition for the term meat, but instead they define various types of raw or processed meat and meat product. So when you look at the meat product definition, the last row of this table, again, they are defined differently in US, EU, and China. But overall, when you look at these definitions of meat and meat product, it seems that culture meat cannot be legally described as meat or meat product. This is because culture meat is not an edible part of an animal, given that the tissue is actually engineered from muscle cells to produce muscle tissue in a lab environment. And when you think about it, it's very consistent with the current debate on labeling of meat and dairy analog, where you cannot use the term meat or milk for this type of product. So overall, I would advise that care will need to be taken when marketing culture meat in different parts of the world in terms of a legally acceptable description for cultured meat. So moving on from talking about the labeling aspect of cultured meat, let's look now at its overall regulatory status. Cultured meat is considered a new type of food in many markets, so including the European Union, USA, and China, and therefore will require to be submitted to some pre-market safety assessment before it can be sold to consumer. So what does it mean for the industry? It means submitting specific dossier to authorities showing that the product is safe before you can actually market it in those countries. In the EU, several companies are currently working on accessing the market and building safety data on cultured meat. But knowing that it takes a minimum of a year and a half for novel food product to be assessed for its safety in the European Union, I don't expect that cultured meat will be on our plate before a few years, before 2023 minimum. And currently we know that lab-grown meat is only approved for sales in Singapore and nowhere else in the world. And the company who managed to get approval in Singapore is called Eat Just Inc. And it's the first company in the world at marketing its cultured chicken nuggets. And they obtained approval for that in December 2020. I'm not sure if this will pave the way for approval of cultured meat in general in other countries, but it's a good first start. This is considered a watershed moment by many from the industry because it's the first time that a meat alternative grown from meat cell has been approved for human consumption. So let's see what's happening with other part of the world, whether or not they're going to be approval of cultured meat through the regulatory process in the coming years. But as I told you, cultured meat is considered a new ingredient in many countries, including Europe, America, and China. And the level of information you need to give to authority to get pre-market approval is quite specific and is regulated differently in different markets. You can see that you can classify new ingredient here in different way in different markets. So new ingredient can be for nutritional purpose or for technological purpose. If it's for the technological function, there will be food improvement agent or food additives. But if it's for nutritional purpose, which is the case for culture meat, they will be classified in Europe as novel food, in the USA as GRAS substance, which we're going to discuss later, and then in China, they will also be classed as novel food product. So now let's look at the different regulatory environment in the European Union first, then I will follow on with the USA and finally conclude with China. So overall in the European Union, it seems that the development of culture meat is very much welcomed. And as you can see in 2019, in the response to a parliamentary question concerning cultured meat, the former European Health Commissioner Vytenis Andriukaitis has stated the following, which is highlighted on this slide. And this mainly said that the development of new meat alternative is an important pathway to achieving the Commission Food 2030 initiative to deliver a climate smart and sustainable food system for healthy Europe. And under the EU Green Deal, the mid and long-term aim is to cut greenhouse gas by 40% by 2030 and to be climate neutral by 2050. So therefore, the European Union created a consortium project called Meat for All, led by the Spanish firm Biotech Food, which started in 2020. And this project really aims to understand the market acceptance and safety of meat alternative, both in lab-grown meat and plant-based protein. And many information are available on the European Commission website. And if you need to know more about this, you can contact me. So focusing back now on the European Union and novel food, the European market offers great opportunity for the launch of different innovative ingredients of food products such as culture meat. And this may fall under one of the 10 different European novel food categories. And as you can see here highlighted in yellow, cultured meat will fall under the category number 4, which is any novel food produced from cell culture or tissue culture derived from animal, plant, microorganism, fungi, or algae. And I have to highlight here that novel food are also defined as any product which has no history of consumption within the European Union before 15 of May 1997, which is the case for cultured meat. And in terms of its regulatory approval, cultured meat produced through cellular techniques will need to be submitted to a rigorous pre-market safety assessment, which is described here on this slide. As you can see, you have to follow many steps in order to get through the system. And as I mentioned earlier, it will be taking the European Commission and the European Food Safety Authority around a year and a half to consider novel food dossier and provide a final opinion on the safety of the specific ingredient. So what is the track record until date for novel food dossier in the European Union? Well, the success rate of novel food dossier has been quite high in the European Union, as you can see from this bar chart. Almost 60% of novel food dossiers submitted to the European Commission were approved, and only 15% were refused or withdrawn, leaving about 26% currently being assessed by the authorities. So a very good track record, knowing that it takes a year and a half to get through the process. So there are different types of novel food dossiers that have been submitted under the European novel food process. None of those have been linked with culture meat yet, but this might come. And this chart really shows you the different type of novel food that are currently being approved or being assessed around the European Union. As I said, we're leading a dossier service in Leatherhead, and if you need to know more about novel food approval in Europe, you can contact me. So now we're going to move on to the US way of regulating cultured meat and what are the pre-market approval process in place there. In the US in 2019, the Department of Agriculture, the USDA, and the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, published a joint agreement, which is, you've got the link at the bottom of the slide here, saying that they will oversee the production of cultured meat and poultry together when they are intended for human consumption. So we know that cultured meat are made from the cell of different species, and this will be regulated by the USDA. And the FDA will only regulate the cell collection, selection, and growth of cultured meat, whereas the USDA will look at the subsequent processing and labeling of cultured meat. The FDA has the authority to regulate production of all food except meat and poultry. And this is to ensure that food products are safe, nutrition, wholesome, and also accurately labeled. Whereas the USDA has the jurisdiction of meat and poultry under the Federal Meat Inspection Act. But cultured meat, in terms of the accessing the US market, will need to be either notified or self-affirmed under the generally recognized as safe procedure which you can find detail on the FDA website. This means that the company will need to gather data showing the safety of cultured meat before it can be marketed in the US. So for the GRAS notification, the company will just notify the FDA about the conclusion they have made that their product they intend to use meet the criteria of a GRAS status product. And for the self-affirmation, they will just need to choose a small panel of scientists to review the substance safety. And the company do not need to notify the FDA for self-affirmation. So this route of self-affirmation has been reported as an easier opportunity for the lab meat industry to access the US market. But I will encourage people to still use a notification process in terms of getting cultured meat on the US market. Now let's look at the pre-market approval procedure for China that may apply for cultured meat. Like in the European Union, cultured meat will be classified as novel food in China, but the pre-market approval process is separate from the one in the European Union, and I've summarized here in this diagram how it works. In China, all the novel food must be notified to the National Health Commission of the People's Republic of China, and the safety dossier needs to be submitted. But on top of this dossier, which is very specific for China, a sealed product sample or 30 grams of the raw material should also be provided to the authority. And if the product is coming from outside China, a certification of that the product has been permitted in the exporting country needs to be provided, as well as an audit or licensed certificate issued by the manufacturer in the exporting country. It takes about 5 working days for the authority in China to validate the dossier. Then they will consider the assessment of the dossier in terms of its safety via the China National Center for Food Safety Risk Assessment. And legally, they have around 60 working days to assess this dossier, but it can be extended if they request more information. The authority will then publish a draft decision, and this will go through a public consultation around 30 working days before finally publishing the decision on a novel food ingredient. Now to wrap up, I have covered in this webinar how cultured meats are currently perceived by consumers, and I also talked about the different regulatory implications in accessing the European Union, the USA and Chinese markets in terms of pre-market approvals, which differ in those different markets, and labeling implication. The main points I would like you to take away from this webinar are listed here. So the first one is that cultured meat industry is in its infancy, and its growth will depend on investment from global players into startup company. Its market price is not very competitive at the moment compared to even premium meat product. And the recent launch of cultured chicken nuggets in Singapore show that some people are ready to eat in vitro meat, even if they have to pay a premium price for it. And I want to highlight here that those chicken nuggets are only sold in one restaurant in Singapore, and therefore are not widely available in that country. It seems that the primary reason for consumers to eat cultured meat would be that it has a positive impact on the protection of the environment, and also in terms of animal welfare. It's quite a good product. Although I think this can be challenged because cultured meat may require lots of energy to be manufactured at industrial scale, depending on the approach used by the company, and may therefore have a negative impact on the environment. For example, if the company is using energy coming from fossil fuel. And it's not clear to me yet which production process for lab-grown meat is the best, and therefore further work is still needed to achieve the greenhouse emission reduction by looking at the technology employed and the use of clean energy. Another factor for consumer acceptance of culture meat will be how it tastes compared to real meat, especially if it's sold at a premium product price. So more research, I think, is needed on the taste and texture of cultured meat. Further research and development are needed to use technology that are, for example, for optimizing cell culture. It is almost impossible currently to reproduce a diversity of meat derived from various species of animal, breed, or cuts. So further work is also required on control the taste and texture to match real meat from different animals. And in terms of regulatory pre-market approval, it's another hurdle to overcome for the industry, and these differ between markets. And therefore, I recommend for any company who wishes to invest in cultured meats to have a robust product market launch strategy in order to foresee any impact on the timing for launching cultured meats in different markets. And with Leatherhead, as you may know, we can help company going through the pre-market approval process in the UK, Europe, and US. And we provide an end-to-end solution to enable pre-market approval from new ingredients like culture meat. And I would be very happy to discuss it with you. May you be interested. So to end this webinar, do you think you will see cultured meat in your plate as soon as 2024? My final thoughts are that looking at discussion I had with authority a couple of years ago, we saw that the industry was about 5 years away from being able to place cultured meat on the market. They were having many problems designing the skeleton to grow the meat. But now, current literature indicates that the industry is about 3 to 5 years away to launch cultured meat in different parts of the world. So watch this space.
Okay, thank you very much, Annie-Laure. That was a very interesting webinar. Just wanted to remind you that you can put into the questions box any questions that you would like to ask. I'm going to start with a few that have come in during the webinar, but do add in your questions and we will go through them. Any that we don't have time to answer today, we will answer afterwards. I would just like to introduce myself. I'm Jenny Arthur. I head up the nutrition area here at Leatherhead. If you've got any questions or queries about your membership, do get in touch at membership@leatherheadfood.com. Or if you'd like to get in contact with Annie-Laure, contact us at membership@leatherheadfood.com and we can forward on the email to her. Right, Annie-Laure, I've got a few questions here. Okay. How is cultured meat classified? Is it vegetarian? Is it suitable for vegetarians or vegans?
Yes, thanks, Jenny. So I think we have discussed already during the webinar that cultured meat is classified as a novel food or grass substance if you look at the US market. And therefore, they have to undergo this pre-market safety assessment before it can be sold as a food. So that's the regulatory status of cultured meat at the moment. It's not a conventional food. It needs pre-market approval or notification before it can be sold around the world. And then regarding the suitability for vegetarian and vegan, the source of cultured meat is actually animal muscle cells. So by default, it won't be suitable for vegetarian or vegan because it's derived directly from an animal cell. And I think in the industry, there's a lot of skepticism because they don't know if, the other alternative, the plant-derived alternative to meat, will be a stronger market compared to the culture meat. Would meat eater prefer to eat a plant-based burger compared to a culture meat burger? This is a big question at the moment. And I think it depends really on the taste and the texture of this cultured meat burger. Will it match or not conventional meat? And maybe that will attract more meat eater consumers to it.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Got another one here. Okay, is there any ethical discussion at the moment, like the GMO issues?
Yes, there are. I think in terms of ethical question, there's different papers and articles that have been published. And you could really see a parallel with the GMO issue because it's a new technology and you're creating a new product grown in lab. Although I have to say that culture meat is not produced using genetic modification. So that's a big difference. So in terms of ethical issues, you can look at the fact that you're using a new technology to grow meat tissues. This is usually seen positively, especially in terms of protection of the environment. So you're not using intensive agriculture practice to get your meat. You just grow them in a lab, which is a controlled environment. But it's still a new technology that people are not really familiar with. And when people don't know, they will be skeptic about new products. So this is something that the industry will need to work on in terms of communication and educating consumer on cultured meat. Another ethical aspect of cultured meat is about how you grow it. So as I mentioned in my webinar, is based on using as a culture medium fetal bovine serum, which might put off lots of consumer. And you can even use blood from the cow fetuses, so not only the serum. But there is currently research done to find a plant-based alternative to this, but it hasn't been found yet. In terms of animal welfare and well-being, I think it's very important when you extract the muscle cell from the animal that they are treating ethically, because this is also one of the big factors in terms of consumer acceptance for any food product, really, animal welfare. And then combined to this, the environmental impact. So we know that growing cultured meat in lab require energy and resources. You need to sterilize the bioreactors, for example, between each batch you produce. So you have to find a balance. Is it really, yes, you will replace the fact like you don't need any more intensive farming to produce meat. But if you design a brand new big factory to create culture meat, and you still need, the resources for it, the energy, there is a balance there to have. But it is recognized in different papers that overall, it seems that culture meat production will be more environmental friendly than intensive agriculture practice. And the final thing I want to mention is the social impact, because obviously, if culture meat in the distant future or near future replace conventional animal agriculture, you will see some job losses in certain parts of the world. And I'm not sure this will be very welcome by some sectors of the industry. So yes, there's lots of ethical discussion at the moment on cultured meat compared to traditional farming.
Okay, lovely, lovely. Okay, I've got another one here. How about regulations related to biotechnically produced nutrients like proteins, lipids, and carbohydrates?
So biotechnologically produced foods are usually considered genetically modified food, and they are regulated separately. You have GM regulation in Europe, for example, where any GM derived ingredient will have to be approved before they can be put on the European market. But cultured meat is not produced using genetic modifications. So the rule on biotech would not apply to this type of product at all.
Okay, all right. Thank you for that one. I've got another one. Not sure if you can answer this one or not. Meat is not only about muscle fibers. where are we with the development of more complex products, including fat cells?
Well, this is currently being developed because this will obviously affect the test of culture meat. At the moment, it seems that yes, you can reproduce in lab the actual meat fiber, but there's still some development to be done on developing meat, not milk, meat fat tissues.
Okay, thank you very much. There's one specific here about the Chinese registration. What type of raw material should be submitted? Frozen microorganism of cell culture?
So this is something I cannot answer now because I'm not an expert in Chinese food law. I just know that they need samples, and I will be very happy to come back to you on that and confirming whether or not it needs to be frozen or not. I imagine so because the product needs to be stable before the authority can assess it.
Okay, so you're going to come back on that one.
Yes.
That's fine. Okay. Okay, another one here. What would be a correct legal name or description for cultured meat?
So there's a lot of discussion about how to label correctly cultured meat. So when it was first developed, the industry were referring to it as in vitro meat or lab-grown meat or even artificial meat. And by doing different consumer survey, they discovered that people in general see those terms as really negative and it wasn't really attractive to them. And on top of that, they didn't really understand it. Some marketeers in the industry also wanted to use the term clean meat in order to attract people more to it. But clean meat is a very generic term. And I'm personally of the view that it doesn't really describe correctly cultured meat. And I think the best description for cultured meat is actually to call it what it is, cultured meat. And people will understand that it's a meat product which has been man-made in a lab, so cultured, and that's what they're going to eat.
Okay, that's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Also, just sort of finally here, what are the key points if I want to get approval? This question is, what is the key point for cultured meat to get approval in the US and in the EU?
So the key criteria really is showing the safety of the product. So we know that the European novel food process and the GRAS process are separate process in terms of approval, but the data that is required in the dossier are very similar. Yes, you need to provide specification of the culture meat in terms of its composition, but if you want to focus on the safety, you will have to show, the level of intake to consumer of this new type of product and match this with any safety toxicological study carried out on the product. And those toxicological study will be, the usual 90-day RAS study, anything to do with allergenicity as well is very important, because at the end of the day, you need to show that this new product that you bring on the market is not dangerous for human health, and you will have to prove that what people will be eating will not exceed any toxicological level and will not harm them. So I will say that the focus on the dossier will be really the toxicological information you provide. And then the rest will follow, the way you produce it, making sure that the production process has got a GMP practice or HACCP system. That's quite straightforward to provide. But the studies on the product is, I think, something that the industry is currently working on because there hasn't been many toxicological study published on cultured meat at the moment, and they're very expensive to carry it out.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Annie-Laure, and thank you everyone for listening. If you've submitted a question and we haven't had a chance to answer it, what we will do is email you after the webinar. A recording of the webinar and the slides will be available early next week, so those will be emailed out to you. And just once again to say thank you very much. We do have another webinar on the 16th of June, which is all about plant-based ingredients. So that might be of interest to you, and you can register for this on the website. Anyway, thank you very much for listening, and goodbye.